Hey everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Cam Unmasked Stories. I'm your host, Liliana. This is a space for real stories behind the scenes, the stories that don't always get told, the messy middle. Here we lead with curiosity, we listen without rushing to judgment, and we honor the human behind every camera. Whether you're part of the industry, connected to it, or simply here to understand, you're welcome here. Take a breath with me. Now, let's begin. Today's episode is called Building Confidence. And if I'm honest, this episode feels a little vulnerable, a lot vulnerable, maybe more vulnerable than some of the others I've recorded. Because confidence is something I've had to rebuild more than once in my life. Not just after cancer, not just after surgeries, not just after reconstruction, but after heartbreak, after moving, and after starting over. After hearing things about myself that hurt, after looking in the mirror and not recognizing the person staring back at me. For a long time, I thought confidence was something people either had or didn't. I thought confident people weren't scared. I thought confident people never doubted themselves. I thought confident people walked into every room knowing exactly who they were. Life taught me something very different. Confidence isn't the absence of fear. Confidence is learning how to keep moving while fear walks beside you. And over the last few years, I've learned that lesson in ways I never expected. I've learned it through cancer. I've learned it through loss. I've learned it through rebuilding my body. I've learned it through rebuilding my life. And I've learned it through rebuilding myself. Because here's the thing, when people look at confidence, they often see the finished product. They see the smile, the strength, the courage, the person who made it through. What they don't always see is the rebuilding, the quiet moments, the tears, the doubt, the days when getting out of bed felt like a victory, the days when showing up looked took everything I had. That's what I want to talk about today. Not confidence as a destination, but confidence as a journey. A journey that, if I'm being honest with you, I'm still on. Because some days I'm still rebuilding. And maybe that is okay. Maybe that's what life really is. Not arriving, not being perfect, but continuing, growing, and learning one moment at a time. So, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2022, I didn't realize just how much of my confidence was about to be tested. I didn't. And at first, they're forced on survival. The appointments, the scans, the biopsies, the treatment plan, the next step, and then the next one after that. You don't have time to think about confidence. You're just trying to get through the day. I remember finding my lump. I was in the shower. Just a normal day, a normal moment. And then suddenly, it was not. I remember sitting down afterwards trying to process what I had just felt, trying to convince myself it might be nothing, trying not to let my mind run ahead of me. But deep down, I think a part of me already knew something was wrong. Then came the appointment, the ultrasound, the biopsy, the waiting, so much waiting. And if you've ever been through something like that, you know the waiting can sometimes be the hardest than the answer because your mind fills in the silence. It starts asking questions nobody can answer yet. And then came the phone call, the one that changed everything. The word cancer is a word that instantly divides your life into before and after, because it's before cancer, after cancer. It's before the diagnosis, after the diagnosis, and before the fear and after the fear. And from that moment forward, everything changed. Chemo started. My body started changing. My life started to change. And everything, and eventually my reflection started changing too. One of the hardest moments for me happened during treatment. I've shared this before, but it remains one of the most painful memories from that time. I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. I knew it was me. I knew it was my face, but I didn't feel like me at all anymore. The hair was gone. The exhaustion was there. The fear was there. The uncertainty was there. And for a moment, it felt like cancer had taken more than just my health. I felt like it had taken me. I remember feeling overwhelmed by grief, not because I thought I was dying, but because I felt like I was losing the person I used to be. I think that's something people don't talk about enough, the grief, the mourning, not just for your health, but for your identity, for the life you thought you had, the life you thought you have, for the version of yourself you knew before everything changed. Cancer changed my body, but it also changed the relationship I had with myself. And confidence doesn't survive something like that untouched. Then my surgeries came. Then chemo, radiation. Then came radiation, reconstruction. And after milestone, part of me thought, maybe now I'll feel like myself again. Maybe after chemo. Maybe after all the surgeries. Maybe after reconstruction. Maybe after enough time had passed, the confidence doesn't magically return. Healing doesn't happen on a schedule, and rebuilding yourself isn't something that it can be rushed. The truth is, confidence wasn't waiting for me on the other side of treatment. I had to rebuild it slowly, piece by piece, brick by brick, day by day, one moment at a time. And while all of that was happening, life wasn't standing still at all because cancer wasn't the only thing I was trying to survive. At the same time, I was also leaving behind everything familiar and starting over somewhere completely new. A town I didn't know anybody, and a place where I was coming to have to start something new. I mean, it was a hard road. And at the same time, my husband and I were preparing to move from Idaho to Oregon. My husband had retired and we wanted to be closer to his daughter and her family. Looking back down, I can see how much was happening all at once. Cancer treatment, appointments, having to reschedule a doctor, uncertainty, packing up an entire life and moving to a place where I knew nobody. When we arrived in Oregon, we lived on my husband's daughter's property in Fifthville. And first, let me say how grateful I am for that. Without their support, that chapter would have looked very different. But gratitude and struggle can exist at the same time. And if I'm honest, the first year was very rough. It was extremely rough. I was still going through treatments. I had established a doctor. I was trying to learn a new town, trying to learn a new routine, trying to figure out where I belonged. And I ended up in the hospital the day after we moved here for a week with a blood condition. And outside of the family, I didn't know anyone, no friends, no community, no familiar place. Everything that had once felt normal was gone. There were days I felt isolated, days I felt invisible, days when it seemed like everyone else already had roots, and I was still trying to find solid ground. I think a lot of people underestimate how much confidence is connected to belonging somewhere, to feel like you have a place in this world, to having people around you. And when all of that changed at once, my confidence takes a hit. I wasn't just rebuilding my health, I was rebuilding my life. I was rebuilding my sense of home. I was rebuilding my identity, and I was trying to do all of it while figuring and fighting cancer. Some days I handled it well, some days I didn't. Some days my biggest accomplishment was simply getting through the day. And maybe that's something we don't give ourselves enough credit for. Sometimes surviving the day is enough. Sometimes getting back up tomorrow is enough. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep putting one foot in front of the other when you have no idea where the road is leading. And that's what I did, one day at a time. one challenge at a time, one moment at a time. But rebuilding confidence wasn't only about cancer, and it wasn't only about starting over in a new state. There were other wounds I carried too. Some of them came from places I never expected at all. Some of them were hurt. Sometimes feel you think your strength seem to carry those words. So some of them came from places I really did not expect. Some of you may know that I am in a polyamorous relationship. When my husband and I moved from Idaho to Oregon, I also left behind a boyfriend I had been with for almost 7 years. 7 years is a long time. A lot of memories, a lot of history, a lot of love. And leaving that relationship behind geographically was very difficult. But some of the hardest moments came later. They were things that were said that stayed with me still today. Things that land at a time when I was already struggling to find my footing. At one point, I was told that sometimes I wasn't loved. At another point, I was told that I was way prettier before losing my breast. And then there was the pain of discovering things I wasn't expecting to discover. Pain of realizing there were parts of the relationship I didn't fully understand. The pain of feeling replaced. Pain of feeling like maybe I wasn't enough. I remember how much that hurt. Not because I needed someone else's approval to define my worth, but because when you're already rebuilding yourself, those kinds of wounds seem to hit deep. When you're fighting to love yourself again, it's hard not to hear those words, those voices. It's hard not to question yourself. It's hard not to wonder what's wrong with me. For a while, I carried those questions. For a while, I carried the hurt. For a while, I allowed someone else's opinion to sit at the same table as my own. But eventually I learned something important. Not every voice deserves a seat at your table. Not every opinion deserves equal weight. And not every person gets to decide your value. Cancer did not make me less worthy of love. Scars did not make me less beautiful. Surviving did not make me less of a woman. And rebuilding confidence meant learning to stop measuring myself through someone else's eyes. It meant learning to look at myself with compassion. It meant learning to believe that I was enough exactly as I was, not because someone else finally said it, but because I finally started believing it myself. And while I was learning that lesson, something unexpected happened. I found a place where rebuilding confidence felt a little easier. A place where I could reconnect with people without feeling completely exposed. And that place wasn't in front of a camera. It wasn't behind a phone. It was behind the phone actually. Yeah, finding my voice again. was, yeah, see, after cancer, after surgeries, after radiation, after reconstruction, after everything my body had been through, I found myself feeling more comfortable as a phone actress than I did on camera. And for a long time, I didn't really understand why, but looking back now, I do. Because people could hear my voice, they could hear my personality, my laugh, the energy that I brought to it, my heart, but they couldn't see the part of me I was still struggling to accept. There was safety in that for me. There was healing in that. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't focused on how I looked. I was focused on connection, conversations, being present, and little by little, that helped me rebuild something I thought I had lost: trust in myself. The phone became a bridge between who I was before cancer and who I was becoming afterwards. It gave me space to heal, space to grow, space to remember that I was still me, but different. Maybe a different version of it, but I was still me. And even today, if I'm being really honest with you, I still spend more time doing phone work than I do on camera work. And I'm okay with that. For a while, I thought confidence meant forcing myself to do things before I was ready. Now I see it differently. Confidence isn't forcing, confidence is honoring where you are while still moving forward. Film was part of my healing, part of my rebuilding, part of my journey back to myself. Because confidence wasn't one giant leap. It wasn't some move moment where everything suddenly changed. It was a thousand small steps, a thousand tiny acts of courage. And eventually, those steps led me back to the camera. But even then, it wasn't easy. I remember sitting there, staring at that damn screen, talking myself into turning it on, talking myself out of turning it on, turning it on, turning it off, trying again tomorrow, and then trying again the next day after that. Because me and C felt different now. It felt different. It looked different. My body felt different. Everything felt different to me. I wasn't afraid of the camera. I was afraid of being vulnerable. I was afraid of people would see my scars before they saw me. I was afraid people would judge me. I was afraid people would leave. And then something happened that I'll never forget. I came back, really came back. I turned the camera on and I waited and waited and waited some more. Eventually, someone entered my room, and I remember thinking, please don't leave. please, please, please. Not because I needed validation, but because I was still learning to trust myself again. Still learning to trust that I belonged there. Still learning to trust that I was enough. At one point, the conversation turned towards my chest, towards my surgery, towards my experience. And I became emotional. I told the truth. I shared part of my story. And something unexpected really did happen. They stayed. They listened. They didn't judge me. They didn't run away from me. They simply listened. And that person is still a regular today. That moment taught me something important. Sometimes the stories we're most afraid to tell are the stories that connect us to each other the most. Sometimes the things we're hiding is the very thing someone else needs to hear. And I carried that lesson with me because without realizing it, those conversations were leading me somewhere. They were leading me towards this microphone. For a long time, I thought being seen meant being visible, being on camera, being looked at, being noticed. But after everything I had been through, I started to understand something deeply. Being seen isn't the same thing as being understood. And for the first time in my life, I think I started to realize that what wanted wasn't attention, it was connection. I wanted people to understand the human behind the screen, the human being behind the camera, the being behind the voice. Because we're all carrying a story. Stories that most people never see. Stories that don't fit neatly into a headline or a label. Stories that make us who we are. And somewhere along the way, I had conversation that stayed with me too. Some of you may remember me talking about this before. I connected with someone through the We Cam Girl community. She had also experienced breast cancer, and she wanted to know how I found my way back, how I did it, how I returned, how I rebuilt, how I kept going. And what started as a conversation became something much bigger. Because after we talked, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about how many stories never get told, how many people are carrying things in silent, how many people are fighting battles nobody else can see. And I realized something. Maybe my story wasn't just mine anymore. Maybe the thing I had survived could help someone else survive too. maybe my experiences could become a bridge between two people who have never met, a bridge between feeling alone and feeling understood. And little by little, the idea for this podcast began to take shape. Not because I thought I had all the answers, not because I thought I was an expert at anything, but because I wanted to create a space where people could tell the truth, tell their story, a space where people could share, a space where curiosity mattered more than the judgment, a space where people could be human, because that's what I've needed at different points in my life. Someone willing to listen, someone willing to understand, someone willing to just say, you're not alone. And now, every time I sit down behind this microphone, that's what I hope to create. Not perfection, not performance, connection. Because these days, some of the moments when I feel most seen have nothing to do with the camera. They happen right here through the conversations, through the stories, through speaking honestly about things that are often difficult to talk about: cancer, confidence, fear, judgment, healing, the messy middle. And maybe that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. Confidence isn't always about being the loudest person in the room. Sometimes confidence is telling the truth. Sometimes confidence is allowing yourself to be seen exactly as you are. Not polished, not perfect, just real. And for the first time in a long time, I think that's exactly who I'm learning to be. And that brings me to something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Why this podcast matters, why I keep showing up, and what I truly hope comes from all of this. People have asked me something, what I hope happens with Behind the Cam. And sure, I'd love for it to grow. I'd love for more people to hear these stories. I'd love to continue telling my story and helping other people tell theirs. I love to create a place where people feel safe enough to speak honestly. But if I'm being completely honest, success for me isn't measured in numbers. It isn't measured in downloads. It isn't measured in views. It isn't measured in subscriptions. Success is knowing that somewhere out there, someone listening and felt a little less alone. Someone listened and felt understood. Someone listened and realized that their story mattered too. Because there were moments in my life when I felt very alone. Moments when I didn't know what came next. Moments when I was scared. Moments when I questioned myself. Moments when I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I remember sitting in that bathtub after finding that lump, trying to make sense of all what I had just discovered. I remember the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling that life had suddenly changed. I remember moving to Oregon, mm, living in a fifth wheel, trying to build a life in a place where I knew nobody. I remember feeling isolated. I remember wondering where I belonged. I remember looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself. I remember questioning my worth. I remember wondering if I would ever feel beautiful again. I remember wondering if I would ever feel confident again. I remember feeling like nobody could possibly understand what was happening inside my head. That's one of the reasons this podcast exists, because maybe somebody listening feels that way right now. Maybe they're sitting in a hospital waiting room. Maybe they're recovering from some surgery. Maybe they're grieving a relationship. Maybe they're rebuilding after a loss. Maybe they're struggling with confidence. Maybe they're carrying something they haven't told another soul. And if they're listening right now, I want them to know something. You're not alone. You may feel alone, but you're really not. Someone else has sat where you're sitting right now. Someone else has felt what you're feeling right now. Someone else has questioned themselves too. And if sharing my story helps even one person believe that, then every bit of this is worth it. Every vulnerable conversation, every difficult memory, every tear, every moment where I wondered if I could share this part of me is worth it. Because at the end of the day, I'm not trying to be famous. I'm not trying to become someone huge celebrity. I'm not trying to chase numbers at all. I'm just trying to reach people. I'm trying to close the gap between stranger. I'm trying to reach a hand out and say, hey, I've been there too. And maybe they'll take that hand. Maybe they'll hear something in my story that helped them keep going. Maybe they'll realize they're stronger than they think they are. Maybe they'll realize they're not alone. And honestly, if this podcast reaches one person, just one person who felt seen, one person who felt heard, one person who decided to keep going because they heard these words, then I've done what I set out to do. Then every episode was worth it. Because sometimes changing one life matters more than reaching 1,000 people. Sometimes one connection is enough. Sometimes one story can close the distance between two strangers and remind them that they're both human. And if Behind the Cam can do that for even one person, and I couldn't ask for anything more. That's because, well, because that's why I'm here. That's why this podcast exists. One story at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment at a time. And before we go, there's one last thing I'd like to leave you with. If you're listening today and you're rebuilding something, your confidence, your health, your identity, your life, I want you to know you're not alone. Maybe your journey looks different than mine. Maybe your scars aren't visible. Maybe the battle you're fighting is one nobody else can see. But rebuilding is still rebuilding. And every step matters. Every attempt matters. Every time you choose to get back up, even when it's hard, you're proving something to yourself. You're proving that you're still here. You're proving that you're stronger than you think. You're proving that healing doesn't require perfection, only persistence. I know because I've lived it. I've rebuilt after cancer. I've rebuilt after surgeries. Too low, please charge. I've rebuilt after moving across state lines and starting over. I've rebuilt after heartbreak. I've rebuilt after judgment. I rebuilt after losing my confidence. And some days, if I'm being completely honest, I'm still rebuilding. Maybe that's what life really is. Not arriving, not becoming perfect, but continuing, growing, learning, because becoming one moment at a time. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for trusting me with part of your day. And thank you for allowing me to share part of my story. If something in today's episode resonated with you, know that your story matters too. You are welcome here. You are seen here. And you never have to walk through the messy middle alone. Until next time, take care of yourself. Be gentle with yourself. Keep showing up for yourself. And remember, survival is loud. Staying is quiet. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is keep going, one moment at a time. I'll meet you there. If you want to reach out and tell your story, you can email me at behindthecam